I'm going to tell you just a little bit about Tim, just a little bit because Tim reduced his impressive bio from just to a few words. Very impressive stuff he's done. He is being overly modest. Tim is currently the Director of Digital Initiatives at Hostage Aid Worldwide, where he coordinates its data-driven hostage tracking system. Tim, along with his wife April, also run the Supernova International Ska Festival, which will be bringing 36 bands from 9 countries to Fort Monroe in September. Do we have a specific date on that yet?
15th through the 17th of September.
15th through the 17th of September, Ska Festival at Fort Monroe. Tim has also served as a Foreign Affairs Officer with the U.S. Department of State for 13 years and was active duty Air Force for 9 years. So, Tim, I'm going to get out of your way. Oh, wait, nope, not yet.
Uh-oh.
Books. All of these are in our bookstore. These are books by Tim. They are for sale, and oddly enough, we have someone there willing to take your money. So if you like, or even if you don't like what he has to say, now go buy some books. So now I'll get out of your way. Thank you, Tim.
All right. Well, thank you, Alan. I was worried like a week ago I hadn't seen this advertised at all, and so I messaged Seamus and I said, has this gone out to anybody yet? I haven't seen it anywhere. I think we need to start advertising, and I think he thought we'd be okay with Phoebus as the subject and all you that would show up. So thank you all for being here. The last time I did this was probably a year and a half ago, and it was still during the pandemic, and there was, it was an empty room just broadcast to Facebook, and it was definitely not the same. I really missed everybody. One of the things that came out of that talk, though, was after we got done, Alan mentioned, all these saloons that were in Phoebus, like what happened after Prohibition, like what happened to the people, and it's like, I don't know about you, were you bored during the pandemic? Yeah, so I was very bored, and I went through probably 10,000 newspapers looking for any mention of different saloon owners. Went through Ancestry.com for all these different people that were there at the time, where they came from, when they were born, when they died, and then all the saloon information I could find. But this is, it was all put together into this Good and Drunk book. So it's about half a book, and it's about a half of, at the back of that is all the people and their bios and like where they came from and what saloons they ran and when, as much as I could find. But there's tens of thousands of entries on the for anybody that wants to keep going with this. But there's a spreadsheet of when the saloons were running and where they were running and the addresses and the proprietors of all those. So it really kept me out of massive boredom during COVID. And these are just some of the photos. I even went to the cemetery and was going through headstones to try to figure out when, if I ran into a literal dead end, I would go there and see it. I just wanted to tell you a few of the stories and share a lot of photos. It's mostly a show and tell, but if you have any questions, like as we go through, feel free to interrupt. Yes, sir?
Can I get signed book right now?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We'll get that afterwards. And I've got one here, like if they're out, then there's a couple. Sure, yeah, absolutely. So this is the Atlantic Garden Hotel and Restaurant. So, there were, at one point, 63 saloons in Phoebus. It's a lot, and that was the documented ones in the books, in the phone books. There were, upwards of 100 that weren't registered, that people were running illegal, brothels and things. So the number was much higher, but this is one of the bigger ones. This is 326 Mallory Street, close to where the interstate is on Mallory Street now. Yeah. Yeah. And this was run by J.J. Leonard, and he had been in the area already, he moved in the 1870s, 1880s, and in the late 1890s, he got a neighbor across the street, Julia Lancer. He was running a saloon with all these old Civil War veterans there. Julia was saying they're all drunks that are coming to your place. She was running a brothel across the street. And they really hated each other, and it was in the press back and forth. And so there's a gate, I don't know if you can see that there's a little fence next to the property, and he was raising goats there. And one day his prize baby goat was missing at night, and so he went out, he was looking for that goat, like went through this, that whole area and couldn't find it. And he started smelling something coming from Julia Lancer's. And he went in the doors, and it was swinging saloon doors like you saw in that first photo. And the boarders there that were partaking of his goat. The press said that it was parboiled, baked, and eaten by the boarders at her restaurant. And anyway, it was a lot of things going on, but he didn't take that kindly at all. And there's a lot of really interesting press releases, the courtroom records of all this. They were back and forth in court for years. I'll get to Julia Lancer in a little bit, but don't feel too bad for J.J. Leonard, though. He was not a good man either. He was pretty ornery. There was in this one, like a Civil War veteran lost his fake teeth outside of his saloon, and he offered a $5 reward for them, and J.J. Leonard would not give him the teeth back. So the veteran actually had to go to court to get his artificial teeth back from J.J. Leonard. But anyway, there are like so many stories in Phoebus, crazier than you would think. But this is the Rishi Lou at the corner of Mallory and Mellen Street, and around this time, this is when 1898, 63 saloons, 2,100 people in town. So that equates to one saloon per every 33 people. And I say it's the highest per capita in the US. I don't know for sure, but I've gone through San Francisco records, New Orleans, Singapore, Hong Kong, and there's nowhere even close to those numbers. So I think it's, it would take a lot to try to unseat us as the capital. This is the Hygeia on Mallory Street. And there was a story in Robert Ing's, there's a book called The Freedom's First Generation, Black Hampton, 1861 to 1890. And there is a entry in there, a black minister's daughter was obeying her father's injunction she keep her eyes to the ground when she passed a saloon or brothel in Phoebus. So she recalled later on that these establishments were so numerous that she never saw the skyline until she was a grown woman. And this one is on 4 South Mallory Street. Obviously doesn't exist anymore. But this was one that was in the Green Book, if you've heard of that, where black and white patrons could stay in the same hotel. It wasn't integrated the same way as today, but like black and white could stay in the same building, which was is rare. It never happened in other parts of Hampton. Like Phoebus was a little bit different. But we have a kind of a special place in our heart for this because we actually have the bar from this saloon in our house. So a church had saved this back in the 1940s, had kept it all these years, and then they were trying to unload it a few years ago. And they had it online, and they said, okay, like we'll sell it for $300. And it's like, okay, let me see if I can get the car, get a truck out there to get this. They're like $200. I'm like, it's not the money. It's it's an 8-foot walnut bar that weighs like 1,000 pounds. So we saved it, cleaned it up. It's beautiful. And when you look at the rise of saloons, like what came before that, and we look at. In the 1830s, people were alcoholics in a major way. Like water is not clean enough to, in some places to drink in cities. They drink 1.7 bottles of standard 80-proof liquor per week per person. That's with kids included into that mix. And a bottle is about a quart at this point. By the 1850s, the Germans come in, in record numbers into the U.S. They bring lager in with them, and then by 1897, there are 250,000 saloons, which equates to about 23 for every Starbucks franchise today. So you see a Starbucks everywhere. Like think about 23 saloons for every one of those. And we look at the drop. It's we start with say 63. I think it's much higher unofficially. It's definitely 100 or more. But by Prohibition, in Virginia, it starts 3 years before national prohibition. So by 1916, November 1st, 1916, there's 0. So we'll talk about kind of how that happens, how what happens afterwards. And it's a lot of things you would imagine. And I was also doing research. I was interested just who was the last saloon owner that was surviving in Phoebus, who was the last one to go. And that would be the boy in the middle standing. That's Anton Alexander Schmidt. I don't know if Tony Schmidt, if you know him. This is his grandfather. Was a fire chief of Phoebus. Was really a leader in the community. He was the son of German immigrants and was. They were also saloon owners as well. So he kind of joined the family business, and he died in 1963. And I kind of look at this arc of, kind of everything that changed in the whole country. So when he was a boy, this was his lamp lighting duty. So he was lighting, gas lamps around Phoebus. And when he died, he was actually working for NASA, building models, trying to get men to the moon. So, it just shows you that art, just a really huge change. And you all probably know where this is. So how do we get to such high levels on the saloon front? Why Phoebus? And a lot of it has to do with the Civil War. So we look at, Phoebus is really kind of defined by its, proximity to Fort Monroe, and obviously the Yankees as well during the Civil War. So it was built 1819 to 1834. 1822, Virginia cedes it to the government. Robert E. Lee is actually the last architect on it. And Fort Sumter falls in 1861, and Abraham Lincoln doesn't want the same thing to happen, so he sends troops to Fort Monroe to reinforce. And so they have a lot of people here, and you see the footprint of Fort Monroe at this point is not the same as it is now. So there's a lot of fill around Fort Monroe now, and it's still a small plot of land out there. But at this time, it was really the fort and just a little bit of land around it. So they needed places for thousands of troops to come in. They needed fresh water, and so that's how Fort Monroe, that's how Phoebus, Camp Hamilton in Phoebus was founded. So this is a view looking towards Fort Monroe. On the left side there, you'll see the road that is Mellen Street now, and the streets that kind of came out of this are Curry Street, Hope Street, Willard Street. Like the streets are, they ended up being kind of the same streets that the military had out there. And the way that they were able to do this is Joseph Seeger owned all the land, Roseland Farm out there, and he was a Union sympathizer. So he let the Union come in and kind of take over his land. And this was the first Union position in the South during the Civil War. And just right behind this, between Phoebus and kind of where the VA is now, it is where the VA is now, but there was something called the Chesapeake Female Seminary. So this was a female seminary. During the Civil War, there were, the Union was worried that there would be snipers there. They take over the female seminary. It becomes the Chesapeake Hospital during the Civil War. It treats Union and Confederate soldiers during the Civil War, and later becomes the southern branch, the National Home for Disabled Soldiers, which is a long way of saying is the VA. It was the old soldiers' home for Civil War veterans after the Civil War. And this is the gate that came out of that come out onto Mallory Street. And what comes out of that is, you've got hundreds, if not thousands, of soldiers there at any time. They've all got monthly pensions, and they would bring that to Phoebus and put that into alcohol. So what else happens at this time is the same year, 1870, 1871, Joseph Seeger, who gives all his land to the Union, becomes destitute, doesn't have money. He can't go back and make that a farm again, so he ends up selling that land to the government. They auction it off for cheap, and this is Chesapeake City at this point, the precursor to Phoebus. But it all looks very similar to the layout that we have today. We also have tourism exploding at Old Point Comfort and Buckrow at that time. So 1870s to 1890s, they're catering to tourists that are coming in. This is the Hygeia here. This is would be close to where the pavilion, the gazebo is out at Fort Monroe in the park. And this is the Hygeia Dining Saloon, later becomes the Hygeia Hotel. So this is what Harrison Phoebus, he ends up running this hotel, does a great job, like makes it into kind of a national location, people coming in from Philadelphia and Boston and Baltimore every day. There's hundreds of rooms there. You know, they end up building the Chamberlain right across the road a little bit later. But this is, Harrison Phoebus does such a great job. He's able to lure the C&O Railroad down to Phoebus and then later to Fort Monroe. They end up naming the community after him for all the work that he did to kind of build that up.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Where did the term Hygeia come from?
The Hygeia, it was like there.
There's somebody or something.
It's well, it's a Greek name for beauty, like rejuvenate. I forget the Martha. You know.
I mean, it's a title several times. I remember the Hygeia Skating.
Yeah. Well, the Hygeia too. There was another hotel on the left side of the fort. So I'll just go back 1 second. Sorry. So if you see on the southwest corner of that, there's a big building there, and that was the Hygeia, like an original Hygeia hotel. So that was they was torn down during the Civil War, but this is a place where Edgar Allan Poe recited The Raven for the first time. So it was a very famous hotel in its own right, but it was torn down during the Civil War, and then 1870s they started rebuilding all of that in a different place over where the Continental Park is now. So then, the saloons and we've got the old soldiers on one end, like lots of them. We have soldiers on one end. We have tourism on one end, and there's this little spit of land right in the middle that, that becomes saloons more or less. Like people live there, but there's hotels, saloons, and kind of places for people to go and spend their money. We see this at the same time, like Hampton's being rebuilt after the Civil War. All the tourism is being built. The hotels are being built, like Buckrow's expanding out. So you've got all these people, seafood jobs, tourism jobs, everything kind of catering to all these new immigrants that are coming to the U.S. So we've got, in Phoebus, it's heavy on Germans, Italians, English. By the 1880s, these are just some of the saloons that are in town, but on the same block, I was seeing Civil War veterans, North and South, on the same block, like immigrants, women were running saloons and restaurants, like African Americans the same way. So it was like a very eclectic group of people for that time frame. Reconstruction was working in Phoebus the way that it was supposed to nationwide at that time. So it was being enforced, and you've got the military right there at Fort Monroe as well. So it just was, I'm sure it led to very interesting conversations at the time. As we look at Phoebus too, there were, again, over the lifespan of all the saloons, there were like hundreds and hundreds of saloons. There were like a few names that are really big in the community. One of those is P.A. Fuller. So Fuller, he's the one that started the Fullers that most people know on Mallory and County Street. But before that, he was running something called the Roseland Club Hotel. So he was running that with his partner, William T. Davis. Other families were the Lancers, the Carneys in the area, and we'll talk about them as well. But the Fullers came from Baltimore, and he got his start in as an architect. So that's how I actually started researching our community. Was he built our house, an old Victorian, and it's still standing, and other Victorians in the area are still there, which is really cool. And this is a picture of him at, he was a gambler as well. So this was him with Cockfighting. So he's there on the third over from the left, and then his partner William T. Davis is all the way to the right. So they were having cockfights at this Roseland Club Hotel, which is where the post office is today in Phoebus. So it was a huge building there. Out back, they would have cockfighting at night. They would advertise that all the way from you'd see it in the papers in Baltimore and New York. People would travel down for these cockfights. And in one evening, just one of the fights in 1897, there was $5,000 that changed hands. And for that time frame, that was about $161,000, in one evening of a couple hours of cockfighting out there. So it's, anyway, lucrative business. So I talked to, does anybody know Terry Fuller? So Terry, we talked to Terry and his cousin Carol for the book, and one of the stories that came out was P.A. Fuller actually won Fuller's on a game of cards. And I said, well, should I tell people, should we put that in the book? Could we tell people that? He's like, let it fly. Like, everybody that cared at the time is long gone, so he's like, that's fine. But Fuller's is one that people know pretty well, and this is a photo of it from, I think, 1907 here. What's really sad for me is, like, looking at during Prohibition, Fuller's is selling candy and fireworks, and it's like, it seems like they kind of got, anyway, you know why they got away from selling alcohol, but it's just sad to see, like, go get your fireworks at Fuller's, and it seems kind of dangerous. And after P.A. Fuller Jr., and then, his son Nelson, they all kept it going. I mean, obviously the family as well, but they kept it going until 1989, and it was demolished in 1993, sadly. Another family is the Lancers, and they were one of the very first families that came to Phoebus. So on the right side is Henry Lancer, and he was at the batteries at Fort Monroe during the Battle of the Ironclad. So he was firing cannons at the Merrimack. He ended up settling afterwards in the community, and that happened a lot. Like, there were a lot of saloon owners that were veterans that came here during the Civil War and liked the area, stayed afterwards. And on the left side there is his son William, and he became, you'll see photos later on, but he was kind of a fixture in the Phoebus saloon business as well. This is kind of, I'll show you a better picture coming up, but this is the Chesapeake Hotel. This is the front. So this is at the intersection of Howard and Hope Street. So this would have been facing Howard Street, facing down towards Mellen Street with that. So this was the very first hotel in 1872 that popped up, and it had a saloon as well. But this was Henry and his wife, Eliza. So Henry was also not a very good man. There's books about his divorce from Eliza. And in the end, do you remember Julia that was running the saloon in the beginning that took the goat? He ends up marrying her, and she's more than 30 years his junior. So that becomes a big scandal in the community as well. So
sounds like he deserved her.
yeah, yeah. They're quirky together, I think. And this is the inside of the Rishi Lou. So this is where Lancers is on the corner now. Like, the building is, more or less, it's like this is where the inside was at the time. But so the family, they had 3 sons and 2 daughters, and every single one of them went into the saloon business. And this is George on the left side there. And George was chief of the fire department as well. Like, he lived into the 1950s as well, so he ended up dying in his almost 90 years old. So interesting guy. This is one that Nancy Carney gave me the photo, but this is the Philadelphia Club. So right across from the American Theater, there's that abandoned lot. It has a big tree out in it, but nothing else. That was the Philadelphia Club. That was where the Carneys had their saloon, and that was. The family came from Tyrone, Ireland. I think for Frank Carney, he ended up dying during the Spanish influenza in 1918. Died pretty young. His brother William goes on to be mayor of Phoebus and is a mayor for more or less 20 years, 1920s to during the Civil War. And this is a view looking to down towards Mallory Street. This is Mellen Street looking towards Mallory. And they're putting in the new trolley tracks. So they had one track already, and they were putting in a new track in 1907. So this is a view of that, but on the left side there, you can kind of make out Carney's on the left side, at least the KEAR. And that's what, you know what this area already, what it looks like now, but this is where, right across from the American Theater. And we also have William Trusty. He was elected in the Phoebus Town Council in the first election in 1901. He owned saloons throughout Phoebus quite a bit. The house is still on County Street. His home was actually built by P.A. Fuller as well. It's in pretty bad shape now, but it might have been a misprint, but it was also potentially a saloon for 1 year in the books. So it was a tiny saloon, but could have been a saloon. And N.C. Barnes, or Northfleet C. Barnes, was another. He was also elected in the first town council election in 1901, but he owned, other than somebody else, that he was the second largest landowner in Phoebus, owned everything. And this was a view of what County Street looks like in right around 1910. And somebody else that I find pretty interesting is Clara Albright. She is the grandmother of Chris Kraft. So if you know from Mission Control, this is, I've been looking for photos from her. I've not been able to find those, but this is a picture of Chris Kraft when he was a little boy. But these are the saloons. They were in the same areas down by McDonald's, the interstate, like down that way. And Chris Kraft grew up during, like after Prohibition happened. So he's a little boy. He's got all these empty saloons. His grandmother, she's a really good businesswoman, and she keeps buying these saloons like before Prohibition, and then she owns all these after Prohibition. So they're just these empty buildings that he just writes about in his autobiography. So I kind of find that fascinating. And then there's another really compelling person. Is Ann here? Hey, Ann. So Ann and I, we were sharing. There's a story about this woman named Carrie Monroe. She used to be a vaudeville star for about 25 years before she moved to Phoebus, like very well known nationally. And she ended up buying if you know Sly Clyde's, like that was her building. That was her house. She ran her Tim, you could probably talk to it better than that, but yeah, that she spent a lot of time over there. And Ann and I were talking about this and like, oh, I'd love to find her more information on her. Like, why can't we find anything on her? And then come to find out, she's been married like, what, 3-4 times? At least 3 times, potentially 4. So she was Carrie Davin, Carrie Grigsby, Carrie Terry, Carrie Monroe. Yeah. So anyway, so after we knew all of her maiden names, then we zoomed in on her, the sign here. This is a high resolution image, and it says C. Davin on the sign. So we felt like, okay, that's her. Like, this is the same person. She's sitting there in the chair. And she also really spent a lot of time in 1910, 1911, like you wouldn't advertise your divorce if you're a woman, probably in the paper, but she was really proud of her divorce from what Ann talks as the cad.
She divorced him because he was a cad and deserted her.
So this is her in front of her florist, right next to Sly Clyde's, and just a couple of things she had put in the papers. So she was spending her own money to put that in there. And then there's a guy named Washington Diggs. He's an African American. He owns, in the 1880s, 1890s, he buys up most of Mellen Street. So he owns quite a bit of that, like multiple saloons and theaters, and he really has everything. And there's a fire in 1893, early 1893, and almost burns down like most of the things he owns on Mellen Street. And that was the kind of the driving force between the Phoebus Fire Department. So they started the fire department after this huge fire in the winter. And it was really because a lot of his property was lost. And when he passes away, he, at the time it was $50,000 in the paper. It was more than that actually, but even $50,000, that's the equivalent of about $700,000 today. So it made the papers that, he well respected, like everybody kind of knew about him, had leased land from him, had worked with him over the years, and they had a kind of a glowing article when he passed. And Lizzie Clark, this is the Lancer family, like she's a Lancer daughter. And so she gets married in like 1890. Her husband John works for the railroad. She has 2 kids, Ernest and Willie. They moved to DC with the family. She's homesick, but there's a scarlet fever and diphtheria outbreak in DC, so she moves back to the area. Her husband ends up getting killed right afterwards. Her young son ends up dying afterwards. Her and her son, Ernest, they end up having this built by P.A. Fuller as well. So this is down close to where the gas station is. It's Clark's Palace, and she kind of throws herself into this. And Ernest is actually E.L. Clark. If you've seen that sign it's on in the slide there, but the sign is still out there. It's a men's store that was on the street for. What's that?
The building's still there.
Yeah. The building's there. The sign's there, but that was her son. And this was just a fun photo from her. It's the Phoebus Social Club, but this was just a piece of that Lizzie Clark saloon. And then we have Lincoln Clark, he's another African American. He's running a saloon on Mellen Street, and he's running a saloon. He's got a barber shop in there. He does multiple things, but his passion is racehorses. So he's breeding racehorses around Phoebus, and he's selling them to the Harlem River Speedway in New York. So it made the press up there multiple times how he's building these, they've got these great racehorses they bring it up all the time. He ends up getting out of the saloon business around 1905 and ends up moving up to New York and New Jersey, ends up moving to Kearny Street, surprisingly, even though he lived close to the Kearnys when he was here. Elmer Salvatore Puccini was another immigrant, Italian, was from Philadelphia, came down here to work at Fort Monroe. He was teaching fencing lessons to future officers at Fort Monroe, and had started a grocery store with his brother on the side, and then they went into a saloon business. So this is you can see Puccini on there, but this is where it was a grocery store. It became a saloon like 1913. And in addition to hundreds and hundreds of saloons, we had 8 breweries running in Phoebus. I mean, it's a mile by mile, and you can 8 breweries. How do you even fit that many breweries in an area without those saloons? It's hard to think that could even happen. But we had breweries from Richmond, Alexandria, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Milwaukee, Newport, Kentucky. It was a lot of alcohol being made down here. It was a lot. This was home brewing. This is down where it's ironic. This is where the ABC store is now. That's where that building, the building is. The most famous brewery we had was Pabst, that was here out of Milwaukee, PBR, and then Portner Brewery was the earliest one in the 1880s that was here. And this is the National Brewing Company. They have delivery wagons, so you could have your beer delivered to your house, on the way to the trains, whatever. But this was Joseph Daly's beer wagon on Curry Street about 1897. And National became, Colt 45 and Natty Boh and all those, if you know. So hundreds and hundreds of breweries, or hundreds of saloons, 8 breweries. We also had lots of brothels in town. And the brothels are a little harder to figure out how they ran, because they weren't registered like saloons. So it's like an illegal saloon. So what I was researching was the arrest records, and who was arrested, who was bailing them out, and what I found, and they were basically running unlicensed saloons. And so the police would come in and arrest them twice a year. They would arrest them because the permit was $100 for the year for a saloon. So they would come in and arrest them, charge them $50 twice a year, and they would make it up. And it didn't seem like they cared very much. But there was the thing that I learned the most in this research project was the difference between, you'd think you would know this already, but there was dance hall girls, there were people that would buy dances, there would be straight up prostitutes. There would be, there's a lot of nuance in the people that were there. For the women that were dance hall girls, they would work in the saloons, dance with the men, 50 dances a night, more or less, and they would make more in an evening than most of the working men would make in a month, and that would be their job. It wouldn't be anything beyond that. And then we obviously had hardcore brothels in town. and a lot of Marys for some reason. We had a Mary Schaefer, Mary Willoughby, Mary Stein. Anyway, lots of Marys running the. I don't know. Popular name. One of the interesting things is like just how tough the women were, like the newspaper articles at the time. So there was a guy named Erwin Troxell in 1905 that was trying to bust into a brothel, and the woman's name is Mary Willoughby, and she was, the accountant in here. It sounded like John Wick, if you've seen that movie. Like, she not only forced him out, she shot him in both calves before he even got a chance to do anything. And at the end of the day, they arrested him, and like she was never charged, because he was trying to burst into her place. So, all the saloons, like what really drove the numbers, the Spanish-American War is like 1898, into 1890 before it's over with, and a lot of the soldiers are coming here and disembarking and coming back from Cuba, and so you've got all these. This is the Chamberlain Hotel at that point, like in the background there, but they're all waiting around. They're getting drunk. There's a lot of things going on, and one of the things. It doesn't have a term, but I called it the Brothel Riot of 1898. So there was two different brothels, and one was Miss Steinem and one was Julia Lancer, the goat woman. And so one of them was down by where the Sitco is now, and one is like a little bit further up towards Mellen Street. But there were, at Fort Monroe, there were regulars, like the regular army, and then there were volunteers. So one of the groups that really got into a lot of trouble was the 1st Maryland Volunteer Unit. So they were really terrible. They got in trouble like for the entire year. They started multiple riots in Phoebus, but the regulars were making fun of the Maryland volunteers because of their training. They made fun of their state, and so the regulars are having drinks at Miss Steinem's saloon one night, and the 1st volunteer for Maryland unit, they come up and they start throwing bricks and beer bottles through the window, and they start a riot. And there's like everybody's throwing stuff back and forth. Gunshots are going off, and so it goes on for 30 minutes. In that location, the regulars finally get a foothold. They come out and go after them. The volunteer unit goes into Julia Lancer's brothel, and they barricade themselves, and they're throwing everything they can get off the street into the saloon. It's really bad. In the end, 75 people were arrested. Luckily, nobody died, but it was pretty bad. But there were 300 soldiers, by estimate, fighting in the street. And then there were multiple riots through the rest of the year, like August and October. There were even worse riots than that, where people. There was a gunfight with the sheriff in town. They tried to take the sheriff had arrested some of the soldiers for trying to lynch a saloon owner, and then the soldiers' friends came and tried to bust them out with a battering ram, and then the Phoebus police opened fire and shot them in the legs, and it's crazy accounts in the papers. So anyway, at the end of the day, Phoebus decides after yellow fever hits a year later, it's time to rebrand and kind of look at reforms. So they end up going into, this is April 1st, 1900. There's a long road to Prohibition nationwide. As I said before, like we started 3 years before the nation in 1916. 1902, Sunday selling's not allowed. Bird law with the percent of alcohol comes into effect in 1908. Blue laws, there's no musical devices. You can't have a piano anymore in a saloon, which is really dumb. The lunches that kind of the immigrants depended so much on in some of these saloons, they go away. Then you can't sell between Sunday and Tuesday, which, a lot of businesses now, it seems like they're shut down between Sunday and Tuesday sometimes anyway. But the state votes for Prohibition in 1914, starts in 1916. And in November 1st, 1916, there's an account in the paper about Phoebus, and it says, thus died John Barleycorn in the city last night. This is in the Daily Press. At the stroke of midnight, when Halloween spirits were at the height of their revel, one of them, King Alcohol, took his departure quietly and sanely. There were sporadic cases of drunkenness in the city. Many saloons closed their doors Monday night. and there were little alcohol to be had. The saloons which remained open did not have hardly enough alcohol to make one man good and drunk. So that's how they covered like the night before Prohibition. Was kind of sad. But unfortunately, it doesn't really impact Phoebus, at least in the beginning. Bootleggers take over a lot of reasons, like the town council is part of the saloon process. The proximity to water right on the Chesapeake Bay. Maryland's not enforcing it. They rarely enforced it during Prohibition either. And here's the first month of Prohibition. The mayor, Joseph Dixon, comes in to the town council meeting, and he says, "Look at this! Like, we're in the papers. Like, we are the model. We haven't had a single arrest like the entire month." And everybody's like, "I don't know if is this a good thing, or should we be clapping? Because this seems like a farce." And I was looking at the town council pictures, and if you look like in the back, I mean, it looks like, And this is before Prohibition, but I think they were all the only reason they didn't have cups on the table is probably because they were taking a picture that night. Later on, as you would expect, they were arrested, they were indicted, but they were taken before a jury of their peers and found innocent. There's a whole bunch of funny stories where people are, the police are rolling in and trying to arrest people, and everybody's been tipped off long before, and that goes on for years. And this is what a confectionery looks like. This is a candy store in Phoebus during Prohibition. So this is what they put up as oh, look at this is during Prohibition, yeah, great. And then I hope these aren't somebody's grandparents. I'm sorry if they are. But these look they do look like gangsters, don't they? And organized crime comes into Phoebus in quite a big way, and and there's all this in the 20s, 30s, 40s. There's mob hits in the 50s even, so it's a lot. Babyface Nelson was spotted in Phoebus. It's hard to get a read on. People are saying Al Capone was here, like Babyface Nelson was here, but they didn't put things in the paper like they're announced in their arrivals, so it's hard to tell. This is Andy Rooney, actually. Or Mickey Rooney, sorry. But he's playing with Babyface Nelson. And one of the things, actually, this was Alan's idea, and it turned out to be actually spot on. How did Langley impact, after Prohibition happens, all these people are out of work, how did Langley comes into effect right afterwards? And what I found was two of Phoebus saloon owners were actually instrumental in getting the government to establish Langley. So we had Harry Holt, Chesapeake Hotel, the one that the Lancers started in 1872. He was one of the people that got the government to start Langley. And Nelson Groom, who was the owner of Clark's Palace Hotel, Lizzie E.L. Clark's grandmother's place, along with H.R. Booker. They got this Department Award to purchase 1,659 acres. So really was, they were entrepreneurs in every sense. And whenever that opportunity ran out, they had another opportunity ready to go, and obviously paid huge dividends. And probably at the time, lessened the impact of Prohibition on the area. So I just have one more slide. Anybody know who that is? Yeah, Amos Gates. Yeah. So Amos Gates, he was a long time, a prominent bootlegger. He ended up living to be 97 years old. And they covered his life, and before he died, actually, they had an interview with him in the Daily Press. And they had some really interesting quotes, but said that he broke the law for the better part of his long life. His is a gentle legend of friendships forged over drinks on the sneak, in jail, out of jail, to the liquor store and back, a bootlegger, keeping watch night after night, the years unfolding into decades. Hide the liquor, here come the police. Hide the girls, here comes the wife. Hide the money, here comes the girls. And it says, for many of the old-timers in Phoebus, the raids on Gates' shot house were something of a joke, because practically everybody, including the police, knew what he was up to. The only taxes he paid were bail money and court fines. It was the cost of operating a business that nearly everyone in Phoebus knew about and half the people patronized, but nobody really complained. No one ever really got hurt at Gates' shot house. He didn't water down the whiskey because, after all, this was Little Chicago. So I'll just leave you with that. Yeah, a lot of people know him, and yeah, interesting life. But anyway, so that was that was how I spent my COVID year. And I thank you all for coming out.
Thank you, Tim. And now we wonder why Phoebus is the cool part of town.
Still
We know how it started. We have time for some questions. If anyone has questions, I'll bring you the mic and let Tim. All right.
What is the status that you know of the Fuller building today? I know it's been empty for. I'm sorry, Lancers. I apologize. Lancers. It's been empty there forever.
I've heard stories, but nothing like. I mean, Tim's like, no, I don't want to talk about that. Yeah, I don't know. It's just derelict right now. Yeah, it's a shame because some of the glass and everything, it's the original glass from that old, 1890s saloon.
On the Fuller's Hotel, the intent was go in and gut it and refurbish it. But it was so bad shape they had to tear it down.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what Terry said too.
Anyone else? More questions?
Well, just back on Fuller's, within the last 35 years, they still had a beauty contest, and you could still get milkshakes, and Fuller's seems to be, do you know of any place that's still around operating? Like Fuller's was one of the last that I know of, but I've only been here 35 years.
From that era?
Yeah, like
Yeah.
it's,
No. I mean,
that might have
nothing
been
in
one
our
of the
area.
last
Yeah.
to still operate 35 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, for something that started in 1900 to be operating for 90 years is like, that's rare in itself. But
To
yeah,
last till the 1980s.
yeah, it lasted until like from 1900 to 1989.
My sister was Miss Fuller's.
Only been here 35 years. You're still a come here. All right. Well, come on, folks. Questions. I will say that thank you for bringing in the genesis of Langley Field. I think that was part of the problem. But yeah, we got a question.
Could you write a book on Hampton, downtown Hampton?
It's, well, I think like for Phoebus, it's easier to envision it because it looks like the roads are the same, like a lot of the buildings are this. Like this is from 1914 here in this photo, and you could still tell where you are, and in downtown Hampton, it's hard to come down here and feel like any of that still. Yeah. I appreciate that, but yeah.
There we go.
I just want everybody to appreciate you, Tim. Can you please tell us how long you've lived in Phoebus?
Thanks, George. Yeah, 4 years. Yeah, we're just researching the area, like in our house again. It's like, and we talked to the Fullers, and just like this is really cool that this is, the family did that, and it's like, oh, the same guy that built Fullers, and then anyway, just started connecting it. And if you've ever seen, haven't updated in a while, but like Phoebus and Fort Monroe then and now, I was working on that as a kind of a daily archive when I was finding things, just to put things up to kind of keep track of different photos and stories.
How old is the post office? Because there's aren't they pretty old?
Yeah, 1933. Like they built that during, the same with the fire department. They built that all in the same year.
The Phoenix station was built in 1938.
Or 38, sorry, yeah. It was
The
built
original building was 1893.
1893. Yeah, the pictures that, if there were any, the old photos, that was like 1893. Yeah, 1938 because it was built during the New Deal, like all that money. And the gazebo, the Continental Park, that was all built during that time too.
Lancers donated the land the fire company's on now.
Yeah.
Were they working on the tunnel back then?
I can hear that banging from my house.
Just go real life ferry to know.
Yeah.
Better know that.
We're gonna have a ferry back.
That's funny.
You never get held up
We need to have the ferry service back.
Ah,
That was one of my favorite things as a child. That was
I enjoyed that high-speed ferry that left Hampton and went to Norfolk. I used to go over there all the time when I first moved up. I'm a come here too. I've been here since '99, so
you're a newcomer.
absolutely.
I have an interesting point. I found that because I went to the fort, the fun day. I don't know if you've ever noticed that, but on top of the moat, there's grass. Guess what that was used for? A pet cemetery.
Yeah.
Did anybody know that? I didn't. I was really ignorant of that.
There. Here we go.
My mother worked for C&P Telephone Company, and apparently some of the houses in Phoebus were still in use of ill repute.
Yeah.
And she said, of course, she was with the plugs, and she said occasionally the plug wouldn't come all the way out. So they listened to some of the conversations. So do you have a question?
That's funny.
I do, but I don't remember what it was.
Okay.
Yeah, there were still being brothels like busted, and anyway, the funny thing that came out of this too is like the Daily Press called me like after this book came out, like we'd like to interview you, and then when the story came out, it had my name and it's like Phoebus brothel expert as a title. It's like probably not what your wife wants to see on the book.
I know your wife. She's cool.
I know. She thought it was actually funny.
Oh, there she's remembered her question.
I saw there was a building in there and it said Elks on it, and I wondered if that was the National Elks Organization
I think so.
clubhouse.
Yeah, that was the. I know what you're talking about. That one.
What? There it is, the
Yeah.
Elks Retreat. Did that have anything to do with the Fraternal Order of Elks?
I would think so.
We're Elks, so I'm just curious.
Yeah, we can look that up. Like, but this was the Chesapeake Hotel, the one that was on Howard and Hope Street.
All right, then. It is just before 8 o'clock. Thank you all for coming out. Before you
Great to see
leave,
you all.
thank you,
you.
Tim, for a wonderful presentation. He always brings such wonderful stuff to us. And, we laugh. Laughing's a good thing. Remember those things? They're flyers out on the desk where you came in. So if you'd like to join us for any of the other events we are taking part in, remember the Dockside Seafood Feast. There's still tickets available. Highly recommend it. And there we are. Thank you very much for coming out.
All right. Thank you all. Thanks, Tim. Thank you.
I got shocked you had a whole